Hi, this is Mark Levy, the Sourdough Simpleton, and today we're going to remake a recipe that we first made in episode number 7 of the Sourdough Simpleton, the Tangy Sourdough bread. In that time we made 2 loaves. Today we're going to only make 1 loaf because some people have told me that two loaves is just too much to make at a time. And we're also going to detail all the steps on the way through, including how to start with a starter that is a little bit on the older side. So if you take a look at my starter here, you'll see that there's some hooch on top of the starter. And that's because the starter is a little bit old and it's been sitting in the refrigerator for a little more than a week. So the question is, what do you do with this? How can we bake with this starter that's a little bit on the old side? Well, the first thing we're going to do, looking at the amount of hooch in this starter, a little tight there, is decide whether we want the hooch or we don't want the hooch. In this case, we do, because it's going to give a little bit more tang to the flavor. It's not a lot, so all I'm going to do is stir it in. And once again, I like to use a table knife for that. I see people use other implements, but to me, the knife gives me the most flexibility. It's not going to break and allows me to get a nice amount of motion in the starter as I'm stirring it. So now we're all kind of stirred in. For this recipe, we're going to need about 114 grams of starter. So we're going to use this older starter to make the starter that we're going to use. In essence, we're going to do what's called a levain, which is French for the word leaven, which of course is what this is all about. So we're going to start out, we keep using that word start. We're going to start out by taking a hunk of starter. I'm not going to measure this particularly. This is just going to be a bunch of it because it's going to be the seed for what we're going to end up doing. This starter that I've now taken the starter from will become my new starter. I will feed this separately and put that away for next time. So we've got about a half a cup, give or take, of starter in here. And this again is the old starter. We're going to feed this. We're going to give it 100 grams of water. And again, this is filtered water that I like to use, not the chlorine tap water, but it's been filtered. And 100 grams of all-purpose flour. So that's 100% hydration, equal quantities of flour and water. And we're going to stir this up. And this now makes about a cup, give or take, in volume. And the object now is to let this sit around for a while. I do have a warming drawer, as I mentioned before, which is set at 75 degrees, which is about the right temperature to rise sourdough. So we're going to mix this up thoroughly, cover it with some plastic wrap, and set it aside in the drawer to rise for a couple of hours until it's doubled in size. I'm doing this in a measuring cup so that I can see that it's doubled in size. After that, we'll take it out and progress with the next step. So once again, at this point in time, all we've done was take about a half a cup of starter, 100 grams of flour, and 100 grams of water. Put it in, and we'll let this now sit to rise for about an hour or 2 or 3, depending on how long it takes to double in size. After that, we'll see you back right here. Well, it's been about 3 hours, and the starter has been rising in our 75-degree controlled temperature. And as you can see, it has gone from where it was to now a full 2-cup measure, to over 2 cups of starter. And it's nice and bubbly and all on top, exactly what we want it to be. Now, to look at this step, we're going to be using 3 of the 4 ingredients of this particular loaf of bread: starter, water, and all-purpose flour. The 4th ingredient is salt, and we'll talk about that before we move on to the next step. So this starter is all nice and bubbly, and the bottom line is a lot of the volume you see really is bubbles. So that's why it's hard to measure starter by volume. You really should measure it by weight. So we've got a little scale here. Take another measuring cup and we'll zero it out. And we're going to measure out 114 grams of starter. I know that sounds specific, but why is it any more specific than 120 would be? So 114 grams of starter, which will be somewhat less than a cup. Actually, a little bit over here. And excellent, 114 grams of starter. The rest of this starter, you could make something else with it. You could put it back in your jar. We'll deal with that later. So 114 grams of starter is going to go into our big bowl over here. And then we're going to mix in with that some room temperature filtered water. I'll move things around a bit. Which is 170 grams of water, which is a little more than 3/4 of a cup of water. And just to incorporate the starter, I'm going to mix the starter up with the water just to kind of allow it to mix better with the flour, which is the next step. And as I'm mixing, I think you can see how this looks. It looks just like a slurry water right now. And now we're going to mix in 180 grams of all-purpose flour. If you're going by volume, that's about 1.25 cups. But once again, I always recommend measuring flour by weight, not by volume. Yes, I know that's a liquid measuring cup, but I measured it in and use it for convenience to transport it to you. Now, we're going to mix this up into a batter, basically. Let me show you what this looks like right now. As you can see, right now the batter looks very thick and the elements are not all yet incorporated. But as we progress, things will get a little bit better. Let me mix it for a bit and we'll get back right to you. So we're going to mix this up until it basically has the consistency of a thick batter. At that point in time, we're going to put this back in the warmer, the rising drawer, if you will, where it is at a temperature controlled 75 degrees, a nice temperature for sourdough to rise. We're going to leave it there for 4 hours, untouched, unmolested, undisturbed. And then we'll take a look at it and we'll see how it looks. So now that we're about finished mixing this, let me show you how it looks. And you can see that it's a nice, smooth dough ball, basically, although it's very soft and very wet. And we're going to let it rise, and you'll see how it looks after 4 hours of rising, and we'll go from there. Now, I mentioned salt. Salt is in this recipe, but we do not add salt now. And the reason for that is that salt inhibits fermentation. So if we add the salt now, it really wouldn't bulk ferment as much as we would want it to over the course of the next day. So you add the salt tomorrow when we're ready to actually make the bread. Just a little tip for you. And by the way, for this whole mixing process, I've been using a big spatula. There are specialized tools for this, like dough whisks and like that. I don't have one, and quite frankly, you don't need one. But if you like one and you have it, feel free to use it. Okay, we'll see you back in 4 hours after this has had a chance to rise. We're back after 4 hours, during which time the batter has been bulk fermenting in a 75-degree environment. You can see what it looks like now. It's at least 2 or 3 times bigger than it was when we put it in 4 hours ago. Now, all we're going to do is cover this with plastic wrap and let it sit overnight in the refrigerator. Tomorrow, we're going to add some more flour to the mix, add that salt, which will then reduce the amount of fermentation, and a couple of more rises and some folding, you'll see. We're going to end up with a very delicious bread tomorrow afternoon. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Good morning. It's been 12 hours in the refrigerator for our dough, or our batter as it were, and now we're ready to get started making it into a real dough to bake the bread. To recap, yesterday we mixed up the ingredients and then let it sit in to warm or to rise for 4 hours. And then it went to the refrigerator overnight for 12 hours, and now here we are the next morning. Let's take a look at this. And you can see this is a very active looking dough with some nice bubbles in it. Looks very good to me. Let's get started. To begin with, we're going to add to this dough 120 grams of all-purpose flour. Once again, I use King Arthur all-purpose flour. So there goes the flour. And then we're also going to add to this 7 grams of salt. This is again uniodized salt. The reason again we're adding the salt now and not last night is because salt inhibits fermentation. So if we would have put the salt in yesterday, it would not have been able to batch rise as well as it did. I'm going to use a bowl scraper just to loosely incorporate this flour into the dough. Tilt this up so you can see a little bit better. And by doing that, we're going to be able to get a cohesive dough that we can then turn out and knead a little bit. Because we need to knead it, obviously. Sorry about that. Okay. So with that done, I'm going to turn this out onto my mat. Every last drop out of the bowl. And we're now going to knead this flour into the dough to incorporate it as a cohesive dough. Okay, so now what we have here is a nice little dough ball, and it is a very firm dough ball. If you take a look at it, it's a little bit on the shaggy side, and that's because it really hasn't fully incorporated all of the elements together as a cohesive dough. We're going to let this dough rest for about an hour. After that, we're going to do a book fold, and I'll show you that in about an hour. And then we're going to let it rest again, and then do a book fold again, and keep doing that for the next several hours. Overall, this first process of today may take 4 or 5 hours until the dough reaches the right consistency. But we'll go through that as we progress. So for right now, I'm going to take this dough, put it into another bowl. I have a little bit of vegetable oil spray in here just to prevent it from sticking. We will recover it. I can be economical and use the same plastic wrap. And then this is going to go once again into a 75-degree environment to rise. And this is still a bulk fermentation phase. And that'll go for about an hour, and then we'll be back to do another look at it and some more manipulation with the dough. We'll see you after this is done in about an hour. Okay, and Now is the end of the first hour, and the dough has been resting in this bowl. We'll go ahead and take it out, see how it looks. The first thing you may appreciate is it does appear to be a little bit more together as a dough, but it's really not. There's still some irregularities within the dough, so we're going to do a little bit of gentle kneading first. And then we're going to do what's called a book fold. Now, a book fold is a technique which is really unique to sourdough. You don't do it with yeast breads. And the object of a book fold is to take one side of the bread and then fold it as you would be folding a book. And then you're going to rotate the bread, or if you're very facile, you can not rotate it, just do it on all sides. And again, take one side of the bread, pull it up, and fold it like a book. Rotate it again, take that side, stretch it out, and fold it. Now, one thing you'll notice at this point is I'm not really able to bring the bread out very far. It is pulling out in a shaggy kind of a way, and then it folds back. That's going to change as this bread continues to batch proof. So we're going to go through a couple of book folds now. And the basic object of this is to, in essence, turn the bread inside out. You're taking the outside of the bread and putting it in, and then the inside of the bread will come out. And that seeks to distribute the sourdough starter, which is incorporated within the dough, throughout the bread, and make for a more even dough when we're finished. So, having done this a couple times, and it is admittedly quite difficult to do at this stage, we're going to turn the whole bread over, put it back in our bowl, and I'll let you see what it looks like right now. Cover it and put it back to rest for an hour. And we'll be back in an hour, and we'll see how it looks then. An hour has gone by. This is hour number 2 of Stretch and Fold with the Sourdough Simpleton. As you can see, at this point in time, the dough has gotten a bit bigger. It's a bit bigger than it was before, and it is a bit softer than it was before. Taking it out of the bowl. I know it's kind of hard to appreciate feeling over a video, but perhaps you can appreciate the fact that it is a bit softer than it was before in the last video. Once again, we're going to give it a little bit of a quick knead just to break up any lumps and try and distribute everything through all the sourdough batter completely. And then once again, we're going to do a bunch of book folds, which again, now you see I can actually pull it out further than I could before. And then folding it over. Pull it out, fold it over. Pull it out, fold it over. So the question arises, when will you know when this is done? You'll know because the dough will be a lot more pliable. And we're going to do something called a window pane test then to show you what that's all about. But right now, it's way too early to do that. I hope you're enjoying this video as much as I'm enjoying making it. Please do subscribe to this channel on YouTube, Sourdough Simpleton. If you're watching this on Facebook, the group is called Sourdough Simpleton. If you're watching this on the website, it's sourdoughsimpleton.com. You can email me your questions directly at Mark, M-A-R-C, at sourdoughsimpleton.com, or you can certainly post comments on YouTube or on Facebook. So having gone through a couple more book folds, and I think you can appreciate that this is, although still not a very pliable dough, it's certainly more pliable than it was an hour ago. So having done that, we're going to do exactly the same thing. Turn it over, put it back in the bowl, and wait for hour number 3. Once again, having manipulated it, it's smaller again compared to how it was when we started this second hour a few minutes ago. So it's again back to smaller because as you manipulate it, you squeeze the air out of it. And it's the air in the dough that makes it get more volume. But we'll wait an hour and see how much more it grows. So that was hour number 2. We have a couple of more hours to go with this incredibly tasty sourdough bread being baked here on the Sourdough Simpleton today. It's now hour number 3 in our journey with this very tangy sourdough bread. You can notice again after another hour that the dough has risen nicely. We're going to go ahead and turn this out. And once again, we're going to give it a couple of quick little feels now. The dough is much softer now. It's smoother. It has much more of an even consistency to it. We're going to again do some stretching and folding. Now you'll notice now I can stretch it significantly further than I could a couple of hours ago. And that's because the dough is now starting to form good gluten, which gives it that extensibility, which will also give it a wonderful crumb and taste. So we're going to give it some stretch and folds. You can look back, if you look back at the YouTube channel or at the website, episode number 7 of the original series of the Sourdough Simpleton was this same tangy sourdough bread made as a 2-loaf bread, but it was made, I would say, earlier in my career of sourdough baking when I was a little bit less confident and didn't really have a lot of the skills that I have acquired. Because sourdough baking is really all about the technique and the time invested. After all, this is the 3rd hour today of stretching and folding this bread after we mixed it up this morning. And we spent, if you'll recall, about 4 hours yesterday. And then it sat in the refrigerator for 12 hours overnight. So, you know, that's 16 plus 3 is 19 hours of time for a loaf of bread. And you might say, is that really worth it? And the answer, of course, is it's worth it. Nothing is worth it that isn't worth putting a little bit of effort into. Okay, it's starting to tighten up a little bit, so it's time to stop folding. Once again, it has shrunk down to a smaller size. We're going to go ahead and put that into the bowl, cover it up, and we'll come back for hour number 4 in another hour. There's one thing about sourdough, it isn't hard. These techniques aren't difficult. It just takes time. Speaking of time, we'll see you in about an hour. It's been another hour. This is now hour number 4 in the slow rise of the batch proofing of our tangy sourdough loaf. Once again, you can see that it has risen nicely since the last time we looked at it, about an hour ago. See if I can get it out this way. Nah. There we go. Thought it would come out this way. It is now a very soft, you can probably appreciate, this is quite a different dough than we started out with. It's pillow soft, fluffy, has a very nice consistency to it, and look how far I can pull that out. That's clearly made a lot of progress over the past couple of hours. So once again, we're going to pull this out and do a whole bunch of book folds. And again, the purpose of this book folding is just to fully distribute the yeast and the friendly bacteria throughout the dough ball. And as we do the pulling, we are deflating the bread more. Therefore, the size of the dough ball is going down. So, I think what we're going to do here, just for giggles, so we can see how it looks in an hour, so I'm going to take some of this dough and just stretch it between my fingers. I think you can see that. And if I stretch it like that, I'm beginning to get a sense that this is a very thin layer, and I can just begin to see through it. That's called a window pane test. And in sourdough, it's a very common way of seeing whether the dough is approaching being ready. And this is getting there. So my suspicion is in another hour or so, this dough is going to be at the stage where we're going to be able to do the final shaping and then do the final proof. We're still really in a bulk fermentation or batch rise phase. Once again, you notice how much smaller the dough ball is now than when we started this most recent book fold process. So, with a grand total of a couple of minutes, that's all you had to do at this 4-hour step. And we're going to let it go for another hour, and then we're going to look at it again. That'll be 5 hours into it, and my suspicion is we'll be about right then to go ahead and do the final shaping of the loaf. And then it has to rise again after that, but we'll get to that. We'll see you again in about an hour and see how far this dough has gotten by then. So it's been another hour. This is now hour number 5 in our bread making day. And once again, you'll notice that the dough has expanded substantially a bit more. So we'll take it out of the bowl. And it's now a very nice, soft, fluffy dough, which we can easily pull quite some distance without a problem. So this dough is now getting to the point where we can go ahead and shape it for a final loaf. And the first thing which we're going to do is go ahead and do the famous window pane test. So once again, what that involves is taking a piece of dough and stretching it between your fingers to see if you can see light through it. And I'll try and show that to you right here. Just take some dough and look through it. And you can see light shining through the dough. And that pretty much tells you that this dough is ready to go. So we're going to shape this dough into a batard, which is a kind of an oblong shape. We do that by stretching and folding a little bit to give us a nice pretty top. And we're going to put this into a banneton proofing basket. So we'll flour the inside, and I'm using all-purpose flour to flour this. You can certainly use rice flour as well. That's the classic way, but I don't have any rice flour, so I am always in the make do phase. With the nice pretty side down, it goes into the proofing basket like that. We're then going to cover this with a wet towel and put this back in to rise for about 2 or possibly 3 hours. We'll see how it looks after 2 hours, and then it'll be ready to bake. We'll see you then. The bread has been in the proofing box, if you will, at 75 degrees for about 2.5 hours. And as you can see now, it is risen very, very nicely in the banneton basket. So now it's time to get ready to cook. Once again, we're going to use a peel, pizza peel, and some parchment paper. I said this little trick before, but I'll say it again for those who need to know. If it won't lie flat, just take it and give it a quick crinkle. And then it will lie nice and flat for you. We're going to take the bread in the banneton and put it right in the center of the peel by inverting it quickly. Once again, you do not cook bread in a banneton. It's only for having it rise. We'll then take a lamb, which in my case is a surgical scalpel, make a couple of slashes at the top of the bread. To allow for expansion and rising. And now we're going to put it in the oven. We're going to put this into a 400-degree convection oven for about a half an hour until the internal temperature of the bread is 200 degrees, about 190 to 200 degrees. If you don't have a convection oven, try about 425 degrees. So I'll meet you over at the oven right now. Coming over to the oven, I'll turn the light on so you can see what we're doing. We're going to put the bread onto the pizza stone, on the parchment paper, and it's going to cook in there for approximately a half an hour. We'll see you back at the end of the time and check the temperature of the bread, and then we'll see how it looks. See you then. After putting the bread into the oven, you can see that the height of the loaf is higher than it was when it first went in. This phenomenon is called oven spring, and it's common to sourdough baking. Well, the oven's been in about a half an hour now. In fact, it's just ready to ring our buzzer, so we'll stop it. Let's check the temperature of the bread with an instant read thermometer. And trust me on this, the temperature of the bread inside is at 200 degrees, which is about correct. We'll go ahead and remove the bread from the stone on the peel using the parchment paper as a nice transfer and put it on a rack. And it's going to sit here and cool for a little bit before we get the chance to slice it open. So that's one important thing with sourdough. Many breads you can slice right out of the oven. Sourdough really should sit for a little while until it's cool before you slice it, to allow the moisture to come to the right temperature and, you know, all the inside stuff. So we'll take a look at this in a second, and then we'll give you our little closing comments at that point in time. So we'll see you when it's ready to cut the bread, okay? Gotcha. Well, the bread is cooled now, so let's have a look at the crumb and see how it looks all together. One comment before I slice it: the crust of this bread is light and there's some flour still on it. I probably should have sprayed it with some water before I cooked it, and I meant to, but I forgot. So if you do spray it with water, you'll get a little bit of a darker crust and a different look to it. But as we slice this bread open, we can see it's a beautiful crumb. The smell is absolutely magnificent. And I could commit the ultimate sacrilege and taste it on camera, but then I wouldn't be able to talk. So as you're looking in this bread, once again, this is Mark Levy, the Sourdough Simpleton, coming to you with another recipe for you to make and enjoy. And I do hope you try this bread out. Leave a comment on the Facebook page or on the YouTube channel about what you think, and we'll come up with more recipes in the future as well. Been a lot of fun. We'll see you next time on the Facebook page. Please do subscribe. Join the Facebook group, the YouTube page, subscribe there, or on the website www.sourdoughsimpleton.com. See you next time.